Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Mishnupad Paramahamsa Prabhupada Ashtatara Shata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhaishanaravin Bhaktivedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Mishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Ashtatara Shata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Samaveta Gaur Bhaktivrinda Ki Jai. Jainitai Gaur Pramanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 27, entitled Understanding Material Nature, Text 13. Please repeat. Evam trivrid ahankaro. Evam trivrid ahankaro. Bhutendriya manomayai. Bhutendriya manomayai. Svabhase lakshito nena. Svabhase lakshito nena. Sadabhasena satyadrik. Sadabhasena satyadrik. Evam trivrid ahankaro. Bhutendriya manomayai. Svabhase lakshito nena. Sadabhasena satyadrik. Evam trivrid ahankaro. Bhutendriya manomayai. Svabhase lakshito nena. Sadabhasena satyadrik. Evam trivrid ahankaro. Sadabhasena satyadrik. Evam trivrid ahankaro. Bhutendriya manomayai. Svabhase lakshito nena. Sadabhasena satyadrik. Svabhase lakshito nena. Sadabhasena satyadrik. Evam trivrid ahankaro. Bhutendriya manomayai. Svabhase lakshito nena. Sadabhasena satyadrik. Evam. Thus, Trivrit, the threefold. Ahankara, false ego. Bhutendriya Manamayai, consisting of body, senses and mind. Sva Abhasehi, by its own reflections. Lakshitaha, is revealed. Anena, by this. Sat Abhasena, by reflection of Brahman. Satyadrik, the self-realized soul. Translation, purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation, the self-realized soul is thus reflected first in the threefold ego and then in the body, senses and mind. Purport, the conditioned soul thinks, I am this body, but a liberated soul thinks, I am not this body, I am spirit soul. This I am is called ego, or identification of the self. I am this body, or everything in relationship to the body is mine, is called false ego. But when one is self-realized and thinks that he is an eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord, that identification is a real ego. One conception is in the darkness of the threefold qualities of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. And the other is in the pure state of goodness called Shuddha Sattva, or Vasudeva. When we say that we give up our ego, this means that we give up our false ego. But real ego is always present. When one is reflected through the material contamination of the body and mind in false identification, he is in the conditional state. But when he is reflected in the pure stage, he is called liberated. The identification of oneself with one's material possessions in the conditional stage must be purified, and one must identify himself in relationship with the Supreme Lord. In the conditioned state, one accepts everything as an object of sense gratification, and in the liberated state, one accepts everything for the service of the Supreme Lord. Krishna consciousness, devotional service, is the actual liberated stage of a living entity. Otherwise, both accepting and rejecting on the material platform, or in voidness or impersonalism, are imperfect conditions for the pure soul. By the understanding of the pure soul called Satyadrik, one can see everything as a reflection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A concrete example can be given in this connection. A conditioned soul sees a very beautiful rose, and he thinks that the nice aromatic flower should be used for his own sense gratification. This is one kind of vision. A liberated soul, however, sees the same flower as a reflection of the Supreme Lord. He thinks, this beautiful flower is made possible by the superior energy of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, it belongs to the Supreme Lord and should be utilized in His service. These are two kinds of vision. The conditioned soul sees the flower for his own enjoyment, and the devotee sees the flower as an object to be used in the service of the Lord. In the same way, one can see the reflection of the Supreme Lord in one's own senses, mind, and body, in everything. With that correct vision, one can engage everything in the service of the Lord. It is stated in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that one who has engaged everything, his vital energy, his wealth, his intelligence, and his words, in the service of the Lord, or who desires to engage all these in the service of the Lord, no matter how he is situated, is to be considered a liberated soul, or Satyadrik. Such a man has understood things as they are. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manovashtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriya Vansha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Bhyavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thank you for coming, everyone. It's been a while for me to be up here. It's good to be back by mercy of Radha Gopinath Vaishnavas. I thought we could start today's class by just giving a little bit of a context. Kapila Muni is speaking the philosophy of Sankhya. So in Vedic culture, and by Vedic culture I mean a culture which did exist, in which everything, dharma, artha, kama, moksha, the education system, military, engineering, astronomy, everything was dictated by the Vedas and offshoots of the Vedas, Vedic literatures which were based on the original Vedas. So in such a culture, 6 different schools of philosophy were recognized. And it's not that all of these schools of philosophy were correct or are correct. Actually, in reality, only one of them is correct. But nevertheless, philosophers which propounded these philosophies existed, and they were accepted within Vedic culture. And if you look at these 6 different types of philosophies, they start from being very materialistic, and they become more and more subtle, and then they come to spiritual. So Sankhya is sort of like sitting halfway there. So the most gross materialistic philosophy is called Karma Mimamsa, which was propounded by a philosopher called Jaimini. And Karma Mimamsa basically says that karma is the topmost thing. It dictates everything. It dictates your whole existence in the material world. And you keep rotating in this material world based on the dictates of your karma, your actions. In fact, Karma Mimamsa philosophy says that karma, it takes the position of basically God, because it dictates everything. I was talking to a devotee recently who told me that when he was growing up, second standard, he was in year 2, and he was taught by his teacher why Krishna was a rich king in Dwarka and why his friend Sudama was a poor brahmana. So the way that they were taught was that Krishna, when he was a young boy in Vrindavan, he used to share his lunch with his friends. So he accrued a lot of good karma, right? Whenever demons used to come to Vrindavan to agitate, to harm the residents of Vrindavan, Krishna would fend off the offenders, and in this way he would, save his kinsmen. And by doing all these sorts of activities, Krishna accrued a lot of good karma. Sudama, Brahmana, on the other hand, when he was young, he did neither of those things. He didn't share lunch with his friends or anything like that. So as a result, when both of them grew up, Sudama became poor because of his bad karma that he had when he was a young boy. Krishna, because of all the meritorious work that he did, philanthropic work that he did, he became a rich king in Dwarka. Sudama, he felt very bad because of what he had done when he was a small boy. So in order to honor his friend Krishna, he went to him one day with whatever possessions he had and gave him some chipped rice. So this is something which is being taught in schools, and I was very surprised to hear that. But yes, school children are being taught things like this. So this is, as you can see, this is like karma mamsa philosophy, right? And our education systems, the internet, videos, YouTube, is full of these false interpretations of the Vedas. So these 6 philosophies that I'm talking about, they acknowledge the Vedas, but they misinterpret them in their own ways. So here is an example of how that was done in this case. Right? So there's no indication that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, nothing like that. In fact, this philosophy is saying that Krishna himself is controlled by karma. Whatever Krishna did when he was young, he got the results of that when he grew up. And then the next philosophy after Karma Mamsa is Vaisheshika, which was propounded by Kanada Rishi. So this is the Vedic atomic theory, which is all about atoms and molecules. The whole material world is made up of these little atomic building blocks. And the smallest building block is called the Paramanu, which assumes metaphysical and almost spiritual characteristics, because these philosophers say that the Paramanu is actually eternal. But we learn from the Bhagavad Gita that everything which is material has a beginning, a period of existence, a period of manifestation, and an end. So again, it's a sort of a misnomer. Then we have, let's go a bit more subtle. So after Vaisheshika philosophy, we have what we're discussing today, Sankhya philosophy, which was propounded by who? Kapila Muni, yes. So Srila Prabhupada mentions there's 2 different types of Kapilas. In Bhagavatam, it's propounded by the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, Lord Kapila. And there was an imposter Kapila, Srila Prabhupada mentions, who made this philosophy atheistic. Essentially, he took out the fundamental characteristic from Sankhya philosophy, which is the consciousness. If you remember reading the last chapter, previous to this, it was talking about the different types of demigods, how they make up the different parts of the Virat Purusha, and then the senses were created, the objects of the sense were created. For example, the sense of the eyes were created, right? And then eyes interact with form, so form was created as the object of the sense, and then the demigod responsible for that, which I don't know, Agni or Surya. So he was manifested. And then after all these different senses, plus the mind, intelligence, false ego, Mahatattva, all these different things, the Pancha Mahabhuta, all these things are created, still the Virat Purusha was inert. And it wasn't until consciousness itself, who is Krishna, was manifested within that Virat Purusha, that the material world started working. So that's Sankhya. And Srila Prabhupada mentions that in other purports in Canto 3, he says that there's some more elements to Sankhya as well. Generally, we say it's 24, but then he also includes elements like time within it as well. So basically, all the diverse energies which make up the material world, plus the fundamental component, which is consciousness, something spiritual, the spiritual spark, which animates matter, that is Sankhya. So predominantly, it's a material. It has to do a lot with the material elements, but then we're introducing something spiritual there. And that's what we're discussing today. Like yesterday's verse, if you see, it's talking about the supersoul. A liberated soul realizes the absolute personality of Godhead, who is transcendental and who is manifest as a reflection even in the false ego. Sorry, that's 2 texts previous. So yesterday's one was, the presence of the Supreme Lord can be realized just as the sun is realized first as a reflection on water, and again as a second reflection on the wall of a room, although the sun itself is situated in the sky. So Krishna is in the spiritual world, but through his expansions as Vishnu, Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, and then Kshirodakashayi Vishnu, Krishna appears within the material world, though he is actually situated in the spiritual world. Just as the sun is situated in the sky, it reflects itself on the water. Part of that reflection, part of that light is reflected, part of that light is refracted into the water, but nevertheless, the light which hits the water can also then rebound onto a wall and illuminate the wall as well. So this is a material analogy which is given in Srimad Bhagavatam. So there's two types of consciousness. There's Krishna himself, who's the supreme consciousness. And in today's verse, we're discussing about the minute consciousness, the minute particle of consciousness, which is the spirit soul. So that's Sankhya. And now the fourth philosophy is Nyaya, which has to do with logic, argument, speculation. So you can see it's more on the mental platform now. And then we come to Yoga, which is all about, see, the Jnani says that I don't want to work materially, because if I work materially, it's not going to fulfill me. So the process of yoga is to find out that person whom one should work for spiritually. Material work does not satisfy the soul. Sense gratification does not satisfy the soul. The Jnani understands that. But the progression is, how does the Jnani become a yogi? He says, I need to work, but I can't work materially. So I need to work spiritually. But who is that person that I should work for on the spiritual platform? On the material platform, we work for society, our family, our government, right? Our boss. But on the spiritual platform, who is it that we should work for? To find that person whom we should work for, that is the process of yoga. Because ultimately, when we come to samadhi, the yogi sees Paramatma within the heart and realizes that here's the person that I've been looking for, that I should now develop a relationship with and practice bhakti yoga and begin devotional service. So devotional service means working on the spiritual platform for that spiritual personality who is Krishna. But the process of yoga is to find out who that spiritual person is within the heart. And then we come to Bhagavat. So that's the sixth philosophy, which is propounded by Vedavyasa himself. So in today's verse, text 13, Srimad Bhagavatam is talking about the minute particle of consciousness, the spirit soul, which is us. And Srila Prabhupada begins his purport by saying, the conditioned soul thinks, I am this body, but a liberated soul thinks, I am not this body, I am the spirit soul. Srimad Bhagavatam explains that the source of fear in this mature world is twofold. Forgetfulness of Krishna, and the second one is identification with this material body and this material mind. These are the two sources of fear in this mature world. So people say that they're fearless. I was just, years back, I had read an article about a devotee who was passing away. Actually, he wasn't a devotee. He was the father of a devotee. So this Mataji, she was initiated devotee, and her father was obviously, he was atheistic and performed all sorts of sinful activities throughout his lifetime. And then, but he was fearless, right? He didn't care. But then at the time of death, when he was on his deathbed in the hospital, this article was mentioning that a couple of days before his departure from the body, he started to go into delirium. So the medical term for this is called terminal restlessness. This is a phenomenon which palliative caretakers, they see quite regularly. It's not uncommon. So just before a person is about to leave their body, it happens, not always, but in many cases it does happen, that the person who has been bedridden and inert for so long, about to leave, immediately this person gets up, starts talking as if someone's in the room, starts throwing their hands around, starts pulling their hair, tossing around their blankets. So there are videos about this as well. So, and her father started to speak, and he said that I can see people floating outside my window. And he said that at the base of my bed I can see dogs barking. So this was a first-hand account that was documented. So obviously the realization of this devotee Mataji was that okay, so the Yamadutas are coming, right? And then she started chanting, and then I can't remember exactly what happened, but one of my friends recently, he was asking, what is that medical term that they use when such a thing happens? That's called terminal restlessness. So all these are results of our misidentification throughout our lifetime with the body, with the mind. I think it's a good time to just focus on a concept which there's a book called Ways of Devotion, which is like a summary study of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Nectar Devotion that Srila Prabhupada has written. And there, the author, Dhanurdhar Maharaj, he gives us some really good insight as to how the vicious cycle of sinful reactions implicates the soul. So the reason why we are here in this mature world is because we're covered over by the false ego. We're covered over by ignorance, avidya. Now Maharaj, he does a really nice analysis in a flowchart. It's a circular flowchart. Maybe you can ask me after the class or whenever, I can show it to you. But if you can just imagine, at least in your mind, or if you have your notebooks, you can draw it out as I speak through it. But essentially, everything starts off in this mature world through avidya, or ignorance. Because the first material element to be created is the false ego. Through ignorance, a lack of understanding of our actual identity, and thinking that this mature world is not related, is not connected to Krishna in any way, leads us to what is called bijam. So avidya leads to bijam. Bijam means sinful desire. Right? All different types of sinful desires we have. That bijam, that sinful desire, leads us to perform what? What do you think it leads us to perform? Papa, which is? Yeah. So ignorance leads to sinful desire, or bijam. Then sinful desire naturally leads to sinful action. Right? Papam. Because Prabhupada mentions thinking, feeling, and willing. Krishna does that analysis in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Dhyayato Vishyan Pumsta, Sangasteshu Pajayate, Sangat Sanjayate, Kama Kamat Krodha Bhajayate. It starts by contemplating in your mind. Material existence is lived in the mind. So two people can experience the exact same situation, the exact same phenomena, but based on their mindset, they can interpret that same situation in different ways. So our mind is very powerful. So sinful desires lead to sinful actions, and then an action leads to reaction. Right? Fundamental law of physics, every action leads to an equal and opposite reaction force, which is essentially karma. Karma acts more on a subtle level. So you get two different types of reactions from a sinful action. One is called prarabdha karma, and one is called aprarabdha karma. Prarabdha karma means an immediate reaction, and aprarabdha karma means a delayed reaction. Okay? This is quite easy so far. You have two reactions for a sinful action. One is a delayed reaction, and one is an immediate reaction. The immediate reaction, which is called prarabdha karma, leads to suffering, dukkha. So essentially, avidya leads to dukkha, suffering in this mature world. And what are the different types of dukkha in this world? What would you say? What are the sources of suffering and misery? Pain in the body, yep. The three kleshas, yes. Yes. So the three kleshas, the three tridents of Durga Devi. But then on a more practical level, Prabhupada also mentions 4 others. Birth, death, disease, old age, right? Which basically summarizes everything.
birth, death, disease, old age. So that is the four sources of dukkha in this mature world. The three causes of dukkha are, as you mentioned, the three kleshas. So suffering comes. Now that's the immediate reaction. Prarabdha karma, it leads to dukkha, suffering. Now, the delayed reaction. What does the delayed reaction go to? The delayed reaction comes to what is known as kutam. Kutam means the propensity to commit a sinful action again. So if you're, let's say, to give an example, if you're drinking or smoking, right, and then you want to give it up, but it's there in your mind, this desire to drink or smoke is there in your mind, and you commit that sinful action again, you do that papa, you'll get an immediate reaction, right? You'll damage your health a little bit, you'll lose some money, or whatever. But the delayed reaction will be that you will want to commit such an activity again in the future. And it will come after some time. You don't know when it's going to come. It will spring upon you. When you least expected it, it will spring upon you. Right? You do a sinful activity, and then you're okay, your mind is peaceful for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 1 week, 2 weeks, a month or 2 months, whatever, and all of a sudden, it'll spring upon you when you least expected it. So Prabhupada related this as a foul-smelling bubble coming from the bottom of a swamp. So he was giving a lecture in, I think it was Los Angeles, and he said that you have a clear swamp. It looks very clean, right? But all the mud and all the gunk is at the bottom. So when we practice Krishna consciousness, we may think after some months or some years that we've become pure devotees, right? Our mind is clear. We've given up our gross sinful habits. But then, what happens? All of a sudden, Srila Prabhupada says, after, randomly, he says, from the dirt and the filth, which is at the bottom of the swamp, a bubble comes. And it comes all the way up, and it comes to the surface, and it goes pop. So this is kutam. So this is what it means that the deep anarthas which are there in our heart, all of a sudden, that propensity to sin will arise again in our mind, in our consciousness, because of a papam, because of a sinful action that we performed previously. What does kutam lead to? What does the propensity to commit a sinful action lead to? It leads to bijam again. So that's the circle. So kutam leads to bijam again. And then bijam, sinful desire, leads to papam, which then again gives the two reactions, delayed and immediate. The delayed reaction goes to kutam, kutam again goes to bijam, bijam again goes to papam. What's the difference between kutam and bijam? So kutam and bijam, the propensity to sin, and bijam is sinful desire. The difference is that kutam is a general desire to commit a sinful activity. But when that general tendency to commit a sinful activity becomes something specific, in our minds we might plan out something. Okay, at this time of the day, when no one's looking, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to go here. That specific planning by the mind to commit some sinful activity, that is bijam. So that's the difference between bijam and kutam. Kutam is a general proclivity to commit a sinful action, whereas bijam is something specific, and because it's something specific, it then gives a sinful action. Now, practicing bhakti, what does that do? Which one of these do you think practicing bhakti destroys? Great. So by destroying ignorance, the whole cycle is demolished. Correct? We start off, Bhagavad Gita starts off in chapter 2 with transcendental knowledge. Chapter 4, the chapter itself is called transcendental knowledge. Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan. So yes, so that knowledge destroys ignorance, avidya. and it stops us from committing sinful actions. What else does it destroy? What about the if we've already performed a sinful activity and we have these delayed reactions which are there already in stock, what's bhakti going to do with that? What's bhakti going to do with the kutam, the proclivity to sin? It's actually going to destroy it. There's a verse in Bhagavatam, I think it's 6th canto, where it mentions that by practicing Krishna consciousness, it dissolves our subtle body, which means it destroys our mind, our materialistic mind. Just as the powerful fire of digestion in your stomach dissolves the food that you eat. So in Damodar Maharaj's analysis of this, and by the way, where is this coming from? You know, if you've read the Nectar of Devotion, you see the first chapter talks about the 6 different characteristics of bhakti, and the first one is kleshagni. Kleshagni means by practicing bhakti, by starting to practice bhakti, it gets rid of all the miseries of material existence, kleshagni. So this analysis that we're doing fits into that kleshagni. So Maharaj mentions that by practicing Krishna consciousness, bhakti destroys not only avidya, ignorance, it destroys bijam, papam, prarabdha, aprarabdha, kutam. Everything is demolished, everything is destroyed by practicing Krishna consciousness. So that's the power of bhakti. None of the other yoga systems can do that. Bhakti is given to us only by someone who carries bhakti, the seed of bhakti. I remember Radheshyam Prabhu, he was giving a class about how Lord Chaitanya, about how he became a devotee. It's something that we don't really know, like it's not like well spoken of. How did Lord Chaitanya, because obviously he's Krishna himself, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but in his early pastimes in Navadvip, he pretended, or not pretended, but he was actually, because Krishna doesn't role play, right? For him, it's not like I'm playing the role of a little child, Mother Yashoda's son, or I'm playing the role as Nimai Pandit. He actually is that person. And that's how you fully enjoy. If you're an actor on a stage, if you're a play actor on a stage and you're performing, at the back of your mind, you know that this is fake. I'm just acting. So you can't really relish it. But when Krishna is acting, he's not actually acting. He's actually in that situation. So he's fully enjoying. He's completely oblivious of the fact that he's God. When he presents himself as the dear son of Mother Yashoda, he has no conception that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. At the same time, he does. That's why when Putana comes, Krishna knows, I have to kill this person. At that time, he's not a naive little child. So he does, and he doesn't at the same time. So Nimai Pandit, at the start of his Leela, he was known as Tarkika Shiromani. Tarkika means logician. Shiromani means crest jewel. So in Navadvip, all the Vaishnavas, they were always very anxious to try and get Nimai Pandit to become a devotee. Because he was such a great personality. He was so courageous, he was so brave, he was so effulgent, he was so handsome. He was so knowledgeable. So the Vaishnavas, headed by Advaita Acharya and Navadvip, they used to think, if only Nimai Pandit became a devotee. So he was a philosopher of Nyaya. So we discussed the 6 different philosophical systems at the start. So Nimai Pandit presented him as a scholar in the Nyaya field, logic and argument and debate. So much so that he used to go around debating with anyone and everyone. You know, Kolavechar Sridhar, the banana seller, he used to sell cups and plates and all different types of articles made from plantain, made from banana skin and banana leaves and all that sort of stuff. And actually, he used to sell things at a very fair price. So much so that he would never get any profit, hardly get any profit. And even with whatever profit Kulavechra Sridhar got, he would use half of it to serve Mother Ganga. Still, Nimai Pandit would come and debate and argue with him. You're ripping me off. You're selling at a price which is too high. I know there's other sellers around here which sell the same sort of stuff as you, and they're not selling at such a high price. And he would beg for mercy. And both of them would argue in a very friendly way. And Mahaprabhu would say, actually you should, Mahaprabhu would say, give me these goods, give me these articles at a reduced price. And Kulavechra Sridhar would say, no, I have to use half of my profit, half of my income to serve Mother Ganga. And what was Mahaprabhu's answer? He says that Mother Ganga is my maidservant. She's my wife. Therefore, you should give me everything for free. And in this way, Kulavechra Sridhar would always lose. He would end up submitting to Mahaprabhu. Other devotees as well, like Srivas Thakur. When Mahaprabhu, Nimai Pandit, when he would walk down the street, sometimes Srivas Thakur would walk the other way, and Srivas Thakur would say, hey Nimai, give up all your nonsense, all your Nyaya philosophy. Become a bhakta, become a devotee. And at that time Mahaprabhu, sorry, I keep calling him Mahaprabhu. At that time he was Nimai Pandit. At that time Nimai Pandit, he would give a wry smile and he would shout back at Srivas Thakur and he would say, don't worry Srivas Thakur, in due course of time I'll become such a great Vaishnava that even Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva will pay obeisances to me. Mukunda, one of the other associates of Nimai Pandit, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he would see Nimai Pandit coming towards him on the street, Mukunda would run away. And then Nimai Pandit would turn to his students and he would say, look at this Vaishnava, look at this Bhakta. Do you know why they run away? And the students would say, I'm not sure. Maybe he had to go somewhere, he had some errands to attend to. And Mahaprabhu would say, Nimai Pandit would say, no, they don't like to debate, they don't like to argue. They don't like to see me in this condition because they actually want me to become a great Vaishnava. And then Nimai Pandit would shout back at Mukunda and say, don't worry, the time is coming where I will become a great Vaishnava. So what happened? So this was the situation in Navadvip at that time. I remember listening to a lecture by my Guru Maharaj recently, and he described the situation, the very pitiable situation in Navadvip 500 years ago, where people, again, they were not properly following bhakti. It was just so much mental speculation, so much arguing, so much debating. It was a hub, my Guru Maharaj said, it was a hub for Vedic nerds. A hub for Vedic nerds. All sorts of things were happening. In the name of the Vedas, people were marrying off animals together. Crazy things were happening. And the Vaishnavas were lamenting. So one day in Navadvip, a very great personality came to the house of Advaita Acharya. Actually, he didn't come into his house, he just sort of sat outside Advaita Acharya's doorstep. He just started chanting Hare Krishna. And all of a sudden, Advaita Acharya from inside, he could recognize that some great personality has come to Navadvip, and he's just outside. And then he went out, and he saw that it was none other than Sri Ishwar Puri, who is the disciple of Madhavendra Puri. And Ishwar Puri himself is the spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya. So he had come to Navadvip. And then Advaita Acharya asked him, come inside. Why are you sitting on the ground? Just like how when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he went to meet the Mayavadi sannyasis in Varanasi, Prakashananda Saraswati was there with flanked by hundreds of sannyasis. Mahaprabhu took a very humble stance and he sat down in the area where people used to wash their feet. So in such a humble attitude, Ishwar Puri was also just sitting on the dirt just outside the house, and Advaita Acharya, he asked him to come inside. And they welcomed him, paid obeisances, started discussing Krishna Katha. Now he stayed in Navadvip for 7 months. Radhashyam Prabhu was mentioning. 7 months Ishwar Puri stayed in Navadvip. And particularly what happened during this time is Gadadhar Pandit, great scholar of Srimad Bhagavatam, he regularly used to have discussions with Ishwar Puri. About what? About a book called Krishna Lilamritam. So Krishna Lilamritam is a book which is written by Ishwar Puri, and every day for those 7 months, Ishwar Puri and Gadadhar Pandit would discuss Krishna's pastimes from this book called Krishna Lilamritam. And Radhashyam Prabhu compares this book to Srila Prabhupada's Krishna book. Same thing, Krishna Lila, Krishna Lilamritam, Krishna book. So they would discuss, and who was in attendance during this time? From time to time, Nimai Pandit would come to hear these discourses as well. Now one day what happened is Ishwar Puri, he was walking along the banks of the Ganges, and then in the distance he saw Ishwar Puri coming the other way. Now Nimai Pandit had just finished teaching his students, and he was on his way to take a lunch. His wife Vishnupriya had cooked a very big feast for him. You hear the descriptions in CC, big mountain of rice, different sabjis, sweets, all these different types of dishes were cooked by his wife. And Nimai Pandit was on his way back to honor the prasad. But on his way along the bank of the Ganges, he sees Ishwar Puri in the distance. He knows he's a great personality. He runs up to him, pays obeisances to him, washes his feet, invites him to his house, and he says, I'd like you to take prasadam at my house today. So Ishwar Puri comes to the house of Nimai Pandit. They give him a grand reception. He sits down. Mahaprabhu sacrifices the rice that was cooked for him by Vishnupriya and gives it to Ishwar Puri. In this way, Nimai Pandit serves a great Vaishnav. Obviously, who is greater than Nimai Pandit? But he's teaching us by example. And then, after some months, Ishwar Puri left. Then what happened is, after some time, Nimai Pandit's father, Jagannath Mishra, he passed away. So what happened? Nimai Pandit traveled all the way to Gaya to do the Shraddh ceremony for his father. And Radheshyam Prabhu was mentioning that in Gaya there's a temple, it's called the Vishnupali temple. And there, apparently in the temple, in the altar, there are imprints of Lord Vishnu. I don't know the temple myself, I haven't heard of it, but apparently on the altar they have the imprints of Lord Vishnu. And while Nimai Pandit was visiting this temple, the Brahmanas were doing a big grand puja of the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu. And they were glorifying the lotus feet of Vishnu like anything. You know, these are the same lotus feet from which the Ganges emanates from. These are the same lotus feet that can give shelter and liberation to anyone. These are the same lotus feet that Mother Lakshmi is massaging. These are the same lotus feet that Ganesh is holding on his Chumalai. Like that, they kept glorifying lotus feet of Mahaprabhu. And Mahaprabhu at that time became overwhelmed. Why? Because he had gotten the seed of devotional service by serving Ishwar Puri. And then what happened? In that temple, in walks Ishwar Puri himself, just at that moment. And Mahaprabhu, in his ecstasy, in his devotional ecstasy, he runs up to Ishwar Puri, pays Dandavat pranams, and asks for shelter, for initiation. And Ishwar Puri says, I'm not qualified to initiate you. I know what a great personality you are. You're the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But then Ishwar Puri says, but since you, being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are instructing me to initiate you, I can't say no. It's your order. So then, Ishwar Puri initiates Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu becomes his disciple. And then he becomes truly a madman. Radharisham Prabhu was mentioning that straight after his visit to Gaya for the Shraddha ceremony of his father and getting initiated, he goes to a place called Kanai Natashala. And Kanai Natashala, apparently even today, it's a very, very pristine, very, very beautiful place. It looks just like Vrindavan. And Mahaprabhu, he traveled there after coming back from Gaya, and he was running through the forests chanting the holy name. He could not stop chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And there, under a tree, he sees Krishna. And he runs towards Krishna to try and embrace Krishna. And what happens? Krishna disappears. Similar to what happened to Narada Muni. Maybe not on that level, but when Narada Muni was the son of the maidservant in his previous lifetime, he had served the Bhaktivedantas during the 4 months of the Chaturmas, and then his mother passed away by circumstances, and then he traveled all throughout the country, and finally he came to a tree and he was meditating. And in that meditation he saw Krishna within his heart. But then what happened? Krishna disappeared. Why? To increase his attraction and love. Purvarag it's called, technically. If you read teachings of Lord Chaitanya, you see Prabhupada says that is called Purvarag. So Krishna does that to increase our love and attraction towards him. And that's what he did to Mahaprabhu. Even though Mahaprabhu is Krishna himself. Again, he's teaching us by example. Then Mahaprabhu, after going to Kanai Natashala, getting the darshan of Krishna, comes back to Navadvip. And to the great delight of all the Vaishnavas, he's a changed person. He's a great Vaishnava. He becomes Vaishnav Shiromani. From Tarkika Shiromani, the crest jewel of all logicians and those who like to argue, he becomes Vaishnav Shiromani. The crest jewel of all Vaishnavas. And still, all these atheistic people in Navadvip, they still try to give reasons as to why something's wrong with him. They say that there's imbalances of air within his body. He should get an Ayurvedic treatment, checkup. There's imbalance of kapha, pitta, vayu in his body. But the Vaishnavas know that he got the mercy of Ishwar Puri. And this way Mahaprabhu demonstrated to us how we can come to that topmost stage of all philosophies. Bhakti, Srila Prabhupada's book is called King of Knowledge, Raja Vidya. So out of all philosophy, even Sankhya, out of all philosophies, topmost is Bhakti. And unless and until we get Krishna's mercy, we cannot come free of the false ego. And also, I just wanted to say, just to finish, we were talking about the vicious cycle of sinful reactions. Now, Srila Prabhupada mentions that we cannot blame anyone else except for ourselves for our lack of Krishna consciousness. Right? Because the tendency is to blame someone else or to blame the situation for why we couldn't do a certain service, for why we couldn't chant our rounds attentively or whatever. But Prabhupada mentions that we cannot blame anyone except for ourselves for our lack of Krishna consciousness. That means that even when that kutam is there, even when that proclivity to commit sinful actions is there, Hare Krishna Puji, and even when that bijam is there, we still have the power to resist that. And Srila Prabhupada compares this to an itch. Prahlad Maharaj in the 7th canto compares this to an itch. You can do an experiment on yourselves. Next time you feel an itch, don't scratch it. Try it out. The natural tendency is to scratch it, right? And it becomes such a powerful thought in your mind, I need to scratch, it just overwhelms your whole psyche. It just overwhelms your whole thinking. You can't think of anything else except for just scratching it. But then you tolerate. You tolerate, and you'll see after some time it goes away. In fact, if you divert your mind and think about something else, start speaking to someone, start hearing a kirtan, that thought will go away. So it's like that. Whenever a sinful desire pops up in our mind, all we can think of is just fulfilling that sinful desire. But Prabhupada says, try to tolerate just as you tolerate an itch. And you can practice that by tolerating an itch. Actually, when an itch comes next time, don't scratch it. Try it out. And you see it's possible. So it's a very liberating feeling to know that you don't have to act, I don't have to act to the dictates of the mind. If our mind tells us to do something, to act in a wrong way or to act in a certain way, it's a very liberating feeling to know that actually we have the power to not act in that way. The choice is with us. Okay, so I'll finish there. Any quick questions? Comments? Yes, probably I believe so, yes.
And you mentioned earlier part of the class, you mentioned about 6 philosophies, and I believe you said Sankhya philosophy is only midway. So that Lord Kapilava, who is the Supreme Personality of God, who's actually propounding this philosophy, how is that only like midway? I mean, why is it actually not touching the top level of yoga, bhakti yoga?
So it's midway because I'm not saying that it's midway in terms of its quality, because it's coming from Krishna himself. Of course, it's transcendental. But I'm saying midway in the sense of comparing it to gross material matter versus spirituality, right? The gradation is coming from Karma Mamsa all the way to Bhagavad philosophy. Karma Mamsa is dealing only with matter, it's dealing only with karma. But then as you go through these philosophies, it goes from gross matter to the subtle level and then to the spiritual level. So midway in terms of that, not in terms of its transcendental nature. Does that make sense? Of course, in any philosophy, if you add Krishna there, it becomes transcendental, right? It becomes yoga. So it's Sankhya yoga. So in that sense, it is transcendental. But midway in the sense of it deals with gross matter, but then it introduces an element of spirituality, saying that, yeah, the whole material world is there, the senses, everything is there, objects of the senses, the demigods, everything is there, but nothing can exist without the presence of consciousness.
When things happen to us, we blame ourselves. What can we blame on Krishna? What's the difference? What do we blame on Krishna? What do we blame on Krishna?
So we should not blame Krishna at all. I would say that, yes, definitely. We can't blame Krishna. How can we blame Krishna for anything? Krishna, I think it's either a verse in Ishopanishad or in the purport, Prabhupada writes that Krishna is the self-sufficient philosopher that has been fulfilling the desires of the spirit soul since time immemorial. But he gives us forgetfulness because we want forgetfulness. So it's not, he doesn't force it upon us, right? And Prabhupada says many times that Krishna wants us to come back to him more than we want to go back to him ourselves, right? So the father doesn't want the child to run away from home, but because the child wants to experience that freedom, the father says, yeah, you can go and I'll give you $100 pocket money, and then when that runs out, you're going to be forced to come back home. Like that. Okay, we'll finish here. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai.